pleasure to welcome Rami Fakhoury. He is the Managing Director of Fakhoury Law Group. He is also the Vice President and a distinguished charter member here at Detroit. Rami, it's a pleasure to welcome you.
Thank you for having me.
You have been in this area for a long time, providing services to corporations here and around the country and sometimes around the world.
Correct.
Let's pick up from where I think is the biggest pain point currently, the H1 problem. If you want to empower entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial activity, you have to have the right workforce.
Correct.
It's a global world. We all recognize that at all levels.
Absolutely.
When you know that there's a need to compete, you should be able to have the power to get workforce from anywhere. It doesn't matter how.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Why are these blocks being created?
Well, I think there are two issues. There's the short-term issue of the unemployment rate, and if you look at the numbers more closely, the unemployment rate amongst college-educated individuals, I think, is around 4% or so. In IT and engineering, I think it's closer to 2%. But there are definitely people that have lost their jobs. And I think it's a very political sensitive issue at this point in time for both parties to take this and address this seriously. And there has been some repercussions around the world, due to the Great Recession. Even India, I think, tinkered and made things a little bit more difficult. The UK has. But that is a natural short-term issue, and I think we're pulling out of that. The other issue is the long-term prospects. Clearly, there has been a stepped-up enforcement, which is a good thing, and it weeds out the companies that are not doing things proper. However, there are a lot of companies that are doing things properly, and a lot of companies that are creating a lot of jobs, value, tax revenues, etc. in the United States. And for some reason, I feel that our government just doesn't seem to understand the good players from the bad, at least presently. And they're just making it difficult for everyone. So instead of marshaling the resources and focusing on a small percentage of entities that may be doing things improperly, they're sort of doing this to everyone. I mean, I've heard of very large corporations that have had issues, and Fortune 100 corporations, universities. So it's not just the smaller companies, but there is an extra burden and barrier for smaller companies. There was a L1/H1B sort of investigative report that probably I'm sure you're well aware of, and they kind of focused in on corporations that were less than 10 years old and had revenues of less than $10 million. And there was a perceived fraud there, or technical violations. And so I guess in terms of a smaller entity, you will have a much higher burden or threshold to meet to demonstrate that your employee meets the criteria and your corporation has a bona fide position, etc. I unfortunately feel that there is a lot of political maneuvering and scare tactics, and economic security is a very important topic to everyone, and I think the government, as well as perhaps us as industry, have not better explained the benefits of well-educated professionals immigrating to the United States, or investors entering the United States. In that situation, it's not a win-loss scenario, but it's actually a win-win scenario. If you look at many of the graduate schools, a lot of them are either first-generation ethnics or foreign-born. In addition to that, if you look at a lot of the entrepreneurial ventures, especially from your area, Silicon Valley, I believe the latest statistic was 50% or so of entities that are started, startups, have a foreign-born owner as one of the co-founders. So these are very important statistics to share, and it's remarkable how little coverage this gets compared to illegal immigration or criminal-related immigration. Really two separate issues.
But, if you look at the unemployment figures, as you mentioned earlier, and if you want to, cater to the local population, wouldn't it make sense by talking about educating our workforce, competing with the Indias and Chinas of the world,
Without a doubt.
that you first, gravitate these guys towards the skill set that are actually required for 21st century.
Absolutely.
And by the time they're ready, then you let them out in the workforce.
Right.
But to stop the flow of, resources, qualified resources to compete on a global level for the American companies, it just doesn't make sense.
You're absolutely correct. And I think unfortunately this is a generational problem. Our education system has been lagging for quite some time. Unfortunately, our country has not scored nearly as well as it should. And right at this time, there's actually a greater reduction, if you will, in resources of education. Education is critical for any nation to survive, and especially in our situation, to remain an economic superpower. We really should have the greatest education system in the world, and we did at one point. I still feel the university system is still the #1 university system in the world, but a lot of countries are quickly catching up, and a lot of American universities and schools are setting up abroad. So I think that there definitely have to be some policy changes to better enhance our educational system, and Bill Gates and others have talked about this for the past decade or so. But in the meantime, we do need well-educated people to bring about the assets, the human assets that we need in order to create these great companies. For instance, Google or Sun Microsystems, etc. And people forget that these people are coming in as non-immigrants and eventually will obtain a green card, but eventually they're U.S. citizens and their children are here and they participate in the school district and the community. They generate revenues through higher taxes, etc., and services. And a lot of them will create spin-off companies, not just one or two, but multiple companies. And the key and the trick is to make sure that we have the most talented and educated workforce throughout the world, so that companies, when they make a decision as to where they want to keep their key functions or departments, they'll select the United States. Now, most companies are global, but we just want to make sure that we have the most critical portions of research and development or analysis, etc., in the United States. And the reason I say that, because those are the highest paying jobs. Those are the jobs that I feel even give us national economic security. And as long as we can control that and lead in that space, I feel that it's a universal benefit for the population throughout the United States.
So as an attorney representing these companies, what is your advice to them in these situations?
Well, one thing I highly recommend is for them to have a very aggressive U.S. recruitment policy. That's very important. But of course, many do, and they still cannot find the talent that they need. So basically, at that point in time, would be to make sure that you follow a very strict sheer compliance regime, and you have good resources, whether internally or externally through a law firm or hopefully both. They will make sure that they manage the process and make sure there are no technical violations. I don't think you're going to see anything on the fraud level. In fact, in IT and engineering, the fraud report stated there is very little of it in the IT/engineering fields. There are technical violations. Part of that is administratively, and part of it is the laws are somewhat outdated for a global economy, a knowledge economy. But it is very critical for each and every company to sort of self-police the process, so that the Lou Dobbs of the world and others cannot point to a shortfall and say, aha, see what you did, you displaced U.S. workers and you brought in cheap foreign labor and you're hurting the United States. So I think everyone has a responsibility to make sure that we fully comply and protect U.S. workers, and that should be our first goal. But with that, there's a definite demand for IT, engineering, many fields, nursing, doctors, etc. And this is from our very own Department of Labor. And I know that others will disagree with this, including Lou Dobbs, but I simply ask them, if it's just a U.S. corporate policy that's making the statement and it's not actually true, then please explain to me, why does Canada, the UK, Germany, even India will soon experience shortages in IT and engineering? So it's not just a U.S. shortage problem, it's a universal problem. And a lot of these countries have far more liberal and updated and smarter laws, if you will, to help their corporations or help their population to attract the best people and the best jobs.
Rami, it's a pleasure. Thank
you.